Well, hello, sports fans, and welcome back to Sports on the Spot. I'm Willie Charger, and I'm going to be joined this afternoon by Nick James, and later on, our resident panelists, Lenny and Ronnie, who are going to give us their take on the sports world. Nick, we've been talking a lot about the NFL the last few shows, and I thought today we might take a break from our discussion of the draft, especially. It is 2 days away. We speculate a lot about who's going to go where and when, what team's going to pick who. We don't know just yet, so I thought we might just take a break from the draft, and then we'll come back and talk about it after the draft next week and see what the results are. I did want to spend today's episode talking about the NBA. We're now getting late into April. We're down to about the last 10, 12 games of the season, and the various teams are jockeying for playoff position. Just quickly run down some of the teams and what their chances are for winning it all this season. Starting with the Western Division, I think the West right now is the strongest division in the NBA, and we have to start with the Utah Jazz. The Jazz have been great all year. They've got the best record in the league. They have had some injuries, particularly Donovan Mitchell, but I think he's going to be back for the playoffs. They are definitely the team to watch. Followed right now closely by the Phoenix Suns, the surprise team of the NBA. The Suns currently one game behind the Jazz. I think a lot of the Suns' success is due to Chris Paul, who many people are saying should be a candidate for most valuable player. Falling behind the Suns, we have the Clippers, who are only 2 games behind the Jazz themselves. The Clippers are on a roll. They've won 11 out of the last 13 games. They say that they're going to make everybody forget last year's failure, and this is their year. The Lakers, they've been dealing with a lot of injuries. They're still managing to hang in there, but they're going to have to deal with Denver. Denver currently number 4. They made some good acquisitions in the offseason as well. It's going to be a free-for-all in the West, but I think if LeBron and AD are healthy, I think the Lakers will be just fine. In the East, of course, the Nets with AD and of course, Kyrie Irving, KD, Kevin Durant, and Harden, James Harden. That's the team everybody talks about there. Nick, any thoughts on which team you think is going to come out of the league and win it all this year?
Well, like you said, you got to start with the Jazz on the West, and the way I start with them is, what have you done for me in the postseason? It's just like the Clippers. I'm a longtime Clipper fan, have had a lot of good seasons in the last 10 years and not really done much with it in the postseason, even being up 3-1 in series against the Warriors, against the Thunder, and losing a 3-1 series last year to the Nuggets, which is just despicable. So, I'm still pulling for the Clippers. I think Kawhi is still one of the best players in the league. If LeBron or AD or either of them are hurt, it's going to really hurt the Lakers, especially falling to that lower seed. The Suns, a lot of young talent. I don't think they make it as far as they'd hope this year, but they're on the right track. Chris Paul hasn't won in the playoffs. He didn't do it in LA. He didn't do it in Houston. He's not going to do it with the Suns. On the East, it really just boils down to the Bucks, the Sixers, and who's the last team in the East over there?
Well, you got the Nets, you got the Bucks,
the Nets, the super team.
Yeah, the super
Sorry,
team.
I wanted to say the Raptors, but they fell off the map. So, and same with Boston. The East is a lot weaker. They have a lot less successful playoff caliber there. The Nets on paper seem like the team to win it all, and they just keep getting better, even with Aldridge retiring.
But like these other teams, it all comes down to how healthy the Nets are going to be at the end of the year. And so far, the big three, their 3-star players haven't been able to get on the court together very much. So I think whichever team is the healthiest team is probably the team that's going to come out and win it all this season. We'll come back and talk more about the NBA as we get into the playoffs. But now let's turn it over to Lenny, who's going to give us his Lenny Lowdown. Take it away, Lenny.
Hi, everyone. Let's talk about rules. But first, a disclaimer. I don't believe in them. I don't follow them. I think that rules infringe on my personal liberty, therefore, not a fan. But they can play a small role in society and in sports. So let's talk about how rules impact sports. First of all, there are 2 kinds of rules. There are written rules, which are like laws, And there are unwritten rules, which are more customs and traditions. They both play important roles. Quickly, let's talk about written rules first. What purpose do they serve? Well, rules can define a game. So, how many baskets to make a point? How many innings make up a baseball game? Answer: 9, no exceptions. The second purpose is to ensure fair play, such as there was a time when in early baseball, for example, there was a common practice of stealing the other team's signals. They simply made a rule, the problem disappeared. Third purpose is to reduce injuries. In hockey, it's legal to pummel your opponent with your fists to a bloody pulp if you so choose, but not with a stick. Remember, the goal is to reduce, not prevent injury. Now, what about unwritten rules? Those are customs and traditions. They serve a super important purpose. The first is to promote good sportspersonship. For example, we all know that spiking a football is kind of ugly, right? It's gloating. So nobody wants to do it. And it's never going to be in any kind of a rule book that you can't do it, or that you can't do some little dance or something, right? But it's definitely uncool. And if you do it on the field, you're going to be spurned by your teammates in the locker room, and your contract probably will not be renewed. The second purpose of an unwritten rule is to avoid hurt feelings. You know what? There is nothing sadder than a 6'6", 300-pound pro wrestler crying like a little baby because somebody called him a mean name. Because that's bullying. And bullying is simply not tolerated in pro wrestling, even though it's not explicitly prohibited in the pro wrestling rule book. The last thing is to prevent irritating behavior. I'm thinking about one of my favorite sports, croquet, in which there is an unwritten rule. In fact, I've got that unwritten rule right here, and it says that you are not allowed to talk to other players unless they clearly indicate that they welcome chat. Interesting, right? And I've got it right here in writing, which leads me to my last and most important point. When researching for this segment, I discovered something quite interesting, and that is that every single one of these unwritten rules, every single one, is in fact in writing about 1 billion times over. So really, there's no such thing as an unwritten rule in sports, and it's therefore a completely meaningless concept. Well, I'm about out of time here, so I hope I've helped provide a little clarity about rules in sports and perhaps some fodder for discussion.
Well, thanks a lot for that, Lenny. That was a very interesting insight on the unwritten rules of sport. I have to agree with you, what you said at the very end. The term itself, unwritten rule, seems to be a meaningless concept, especially when a lot of people don't even know what the unwritten rule actually is until they find out later that they broke it. To me, I think baseball has the dumbest unwritten rules I've ever heard of. The idea that if your team's ahead by a bunch of runs late in the game, you shouldn't steal the base. That's a real no-no. If a pitcher is pitching a no-hitter and you decide that you want to lay down a bunt, that's also breaking another unwritten rule. I don't buy that. If my team's down 1-0 and it's the 8th inning, I want to get a guy on base, and that third baseman's way out in left field, I'm going to lay down the bunt. There's a lot of ridiculous rules. And I bring this up because this past weekend in Dodger Stadium, Fernando Tatis was accused of breaking the unwritten rules by supposedly staring down at the catcher and stealing the signs before he hit a home run. The Dodger fans were irate. Bill Plaschke at the time said that another example of the Dodgers being cheated. These unwritten rules are crazy. What do you think, Nick?
I mean, I saw the footage of it. He looked down. If you're gonna cry about that, A, he's not the only one doing it. B, get better at hiding your signals. Same thing with football. If it's 4th and 1 and you're up by 2 touchdowns, they want you to punt it. It's like, screw that, go for it. Like, command the lead and hold on to it. And with basketball, you see guys dribbling out the final seconds of the game. unwritten rule, respect, whatever it is. I don't want to hear about it. If it gets broken, it's not a rule. It's not causing your team to lose. It's causing your ego to lose. So just get over it.
The most ridiculous example was last season when Tatis hit a grand slam home run on a 3-0 count with the Padres way ahead in the game. People criticized him for that. Even his own manager said that was a bad thing for him to do. He later apologized for hitting a grand slam home run. I think I've heard it all. Anyway, the more I talk about this subject, the more I get irate. Let's switch gears and send it over to the Ronnie rundown.
What's going on, everybody? Back at you. Going to talk a couple things. Hope everybody's excited for the draft. I'll be looking forward to see how the Giants screw it up this year. Not too many picks for you today. I do want to talk about the Kansas City Royals. I've been thinking a lot about a future bet on them to maybe win the division, win the pennant, win the World Series. The Royals are playing good baseball, and the only reason I know that is because I've been watching a lot of their games. Actually, a former buddy of mine, Paul Pencilieri, I've heard rumors that he's down there in Kansas City, and let's just say I'm looking for him. All right, so I've been watching a lot of games, hoping maybe I can spot him in the crowd, get some kind of confirmation that he's down there. So, Paul, if you hear this, we'll be seeing you real soon, okay? But the Royals, they got a great lineup, very underrated batting lineup, and their pitching ain't too bad. I've been reading about them maybe making a trade for another starting pitcher. Very underrated team. Not saying they're going to win the World Series. As you've heard me talk about before, we place a future. Hopefully they make the playoffs, and you hedge your bet by betting on the other team. A couple of other buddies of mine have taught me that trick. Sal Saliano knows about that trick. Vinny Valvucci knows about that trick. We all converse and share our thoughts on that. So pay attention to that. But we're gonna keep it short today because I got a lot of work to do. The Royals game is actually starting pretty soon, and I'm on Pencilieri lookout. So. We'll be looking for him, and you never know. I may be my pockets may be a little more full after I get a hold of that guy. So good luck. We'll keep monitoring some baseball bets and other futures bets going down, but we got a lot of work to do. So we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Ron. Well, now's a part of the program's kind of fun. We take a question from a viewer. We have an avalanche of these questions, but I picked one. I think it's a good one. Question is this: does Justin Fields' medical condition change his draft prospects? And if it does, should it? What do you think, Nick?
Well, he has epilepsy, but it is controlled, and there's been other players in the NFL that have had this. So I think it's just an excuse to knock him. If anything, should it change his draft prospect? Yeah, I think it should if it's actually going to affect what you're going to get on the field or, an extended amount of time to be able to play in the league. This isn't really like an injury history. So I think playing his last season in Ohio State affected his draft stock more than, this medical condition. What about you, Willie?
All NFL teams have legions of doctors who study all of the medical records of these players before they take a risk on expending millions of dollars. I think that this is no exception. I agree with Nick. If he's had this condition before, I don't see why it's going to affect him right now. It's not like he's blind in one eye and then they found out about it after the draft, as was the case in a previous draft many years ago. In the end, I don't think it should affect his draft standing one bit. What do you think, Ron?
Yeah, well, you make a good point. Trust the doctors. These guys are professionals, so they know what they're talking about. But with that said, when I think about it, Eli Manning have epilepsy? No. Justin Fields does. So with that in mind, I can touch the guy with a 10-foot pole. So, that's basically, putting two and two together. I'm going to pass on Justin Fields.
I'm with you, Ron. Now, I don't know who this Justin Fields character is or what sport he plays, but come on, let's use common sense. When I was playing sandlot ball and we were all picking who was going to be on what team, the kid with the broken arm got picked last. Well, this Justin guy, he's going to get picked last. Common sense.
Well, it seems like we have a diverse set of opinions on the Justin Fields situation, and we're just going to have to find out in a couple of days when that draft takes place and see what actually happens with him. We've reached a part of the show where we're going to have to say goodbye. I wanted to thank all of our viewers for being here and tuning in. Just wanted to remind everybody that you can always comment and subscribe right in on the show, like it if you want. And we really appreciate those positive comments. I think I can just say goodbye for everybody and wish you all luck, and we'll see you next week.